Tommy the Hammer Morrison had thrown 5 jabs at the small Chinese man in front of him, and all 5 had hit nothing but air. That shouldn't have been possible. Tommy was 35-0 with 28 knockouts. His jab was a piston, fast and accurate enough to tag Olympic-level boxers in sparring, sharp enough to break orbital bones in actual fights. He'd spent 15 years perfecting that jab, throwing it 10,000 times against heavy bags, speed bags, and human faces. It was the foundation of everything he did in the ring. But this guy, this 5'7" martial artist who weighed maybe 140 pounds soaking wet, was making Tommy look like he'd never thrown a punch in his life. And they were only 90 seconds into round 1. Tommy reset his feet, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, trying to time his opponent's movement. The small man, Bruce something, Eddie had said his name was, stood in a strange stance, too upright for boxing, weight distributed evenly instead of coiled on the back foot. His hands were low, open, relaxed. Everything about his posture screamed amateur to Tommy's trained eye, except for the results. Tommy snapped out a 6th jab, this one with more commitment, more speed. He saw it coming off his shoulder clean, traveling straight down the pipe toward Bruce's face. Bruce's head moved. Not a slip. Boxers slipped punches with their whole upper body, a practiced roll of the shoulders and spine. This was different. Bruce's head shifted maybe 3 inches to the left, and Tommy's glove passed through empty space where his nose had been a fraction of a second earlier. Minimal movement. Maximum efficiency. The miss threw Tommy slightly off balance. He'd expected contact, expected the satisfying thud of leather on flesh. Instead, there was nothing, and his momentum carried him forward a half step too far. Bruce didn't counter, didn't throw anything back. Just reset, hands still low, watching. Tommy could hear his own breathing, louder than it should be 90 seconds into a light sparring session. Could hear the faint whir of Eddie's 8mm camera in the corner, capturing this. Could hear the chain of the heavy bag in the far corner of Main Street boxing gym swaying slightly from where some other fighter had been working it hours ago. What he couldn't hear was Bruce breathing at all. "Come on," Bruce said quietly. Not taunting, almost encouraging. "Try again." Tommy's jaw tightened. He threw a combination this time, jab, jab, right cross. The 1-2-3 that had put away 17 professional opponents, that had broken jaws and ended fights in the middle rounds when the other guy was tired and his guard started dropping. First jab, missed by inches, Bruce's head moving again with that minimal shift. Second jab, missed by less, but still missed, Bruce now moving his feet in a tiny shuffle that took his center line offline. Right cross, Tommy committed fully to this one, throwing his weight behind it, his right hand launching from his hip with bad intentions. Bruce wasn't there. He'd moved. Tommy couldn't even see exactly how, and the right cross sailed past his shoulder. Tommy's upper body was extended, overcommit, and for a brief moment his chin was up and his hands were low, and he was completely, utterly vulnerable. Bruce still didn't throw anything. Just stepped back, creating distance again, resetting. Tommy straightened up, frustration building hot in his chest. "Stand still," he muttered, not really meaning Bruce to hear it. "Why?" Bruce asked, and there was something in his tone, not mockery, but genuine curiosity. "In a real fight, would your opponent stand still?" Tommy didn't answer. He circled left, trying to cut off the ring, trying to use his size and his understanding of angles to trap this guy in a corner where he couldn't slip and slide and make Tommy look like a chump. Bruce circled with him, maintaining distance, and Tommy realized with a cold shock that Bruce was controlling the geography of the ring. Not Tommy, Bruce. Even though Tommy was the boxer, even though this was Tommy's gym, Bruce was dictating where they moved and how fast and what distance they maintained. 2 minutes into round 1. Tommy threw a jab to draw a reaction, then immediately followed with a left hook, a feint and rib combination his trainer Eddie had drilled into him for years. It worked against everyone. The jab made opponents think about protecting their face, and the hook came in from the side while they were focused on the center. Bruce's right hand came up in a strange, scooping motion that deflected the jab. His left hand simultaneously checked Tommy's hook before it could get started, palm meeting Tommy's glove and redirecting it downward. Both of Tommy's punches neutralized. At the same time, Tommy had never seen anyone do that in a boxing ring. What the hell kind of defense is that? Tommy said, backing off, resetting. Wing Chun, Bruce said simply. Different system. This is boxing, Tommy said, irritation clear in his voice now. We're boxing. You're boxing, Bruce corrected gently. I'm fighting. Tommy's hands dropped slightly, confusion mixing with his frustration. What's the difference? Bruce smiled, not condescending, but like a teacher who'd just gotten the question he'd been waiting for. Get 2 more rounds. You'll understand. The bell rang. Eddie's phone alarm, set for 3-minute intervals, and Tommy walked to his corner, breathing harder than he wanted to admit. Eddie was there with water, and the 8mm camera was still running on its tripod, the lens pointed at the ring. Eddie, Tommy said, low enough that Bruce wouldn't hear across the ring. What the fuck? Eddie Malone, 55 years old, former light heavyweight contender whose career had been ended by a detached retina in 1952, squeezed water into Tommy's mouth and said nothing for a moment. Just looked at Tommy with an expression Tommy couldn't quite read. You starting to see it? Eddie finally asked. See what? That I can't hit a guy who weighs 140 pounds? Yeah, Eddie, I'm seeing that real clear. You're seeing that there's something outside boxing, Eddie said quietly. Something you don't understand yet. Tommy looked across the ring. Bruce was standing in his corner. He didn't have a corner man, didn't need one apparently, doing some kind of stretching routine that looked more like Tai Chi than anything Tommy had seen in a boxing gym. He looked completely relaxed. Looked like he could do this all night. Tommy looked down at his own hands, wrapped in 16-ounce Everlast sparring gloves. Hands that had 135 professional fights. Hands that had knocked out 28 men. Hands that hadn't touched Bruce Lee once in 3 minutes. I need to figure him out, Tommy muttered. You do, Eddie agreed. And you will. But first you need to accept that what you know, all that boxing, all that technique, might not be enough. Tommy looked up sharply. You saying I'm not good enough? I'm saying you're incomplete, Eddie said. And that little man over there is about to show you exactly how incomplete you are. The phone alarm rang again. Round 2. Tommy stood up, rolling his shoulders, trying to shake off the frustration. He was Tommy, the Hammer Morrison. He was 35-0. He was ranked 8th in the heavyweight division and scheduled to fight brutal Bob Henderson in 6 weeks for a title eliminator. He was not going to be embarrassed by a 140-pound martial arts instructor. He stepped back to the center of the ring. Bruce met him there. They touched gloves, a respectful tap, tradition even in sparring. Ready? Bruce asked. Tommy nodded. What happened next would change everything Tommy thought he knew about fighting. But first, he had to learn a lesson he didn't even know he needed. ________________________ Eddie Malone had been in boxing for 41 years. He'd started as a corner boy in 1925, when he was 9 years old, working fights at the Olympic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles for 50 cents a night. By 16, he was fighting professionally himself. Scrappy Irish kid from Boyle Heights with fast hands and a granite chin. He'd gone December 3rd, 47 as a light heavyweight, good enough to get ranked, never quite good enough to get a title shot. The detached retina in 1952 had ended that dream, but Eddie had stayed in the game. Trainer now. Good one, too. He'd cornered 3 world champions and developed a reputation for taking raw talent and turning it into something refined. Tommy Morrison was his latest project and potentially his best. The kid, Eddie still thought of him as a kid, even though Tommy was 28. Tommy the Hammer, Morrison had thrown 5 jabs at the small Chinese man in front of him, and all 5 had hit nothing but air. That shouldn't have been possible. Tommy was 35-0 with 28 knockouts. His jab was a piston, fast and accurate enough to tag Olympic-level boxers in sparring, sharp enough to break orbital bones in actual fights. He'd spent 15 years perfecting that jab, throwing it 10,000 times against heavy bags, speed bags, and human faces. It was the foundation of everything he did in the ring. But this guy, this 5'7" martial artist who weighed maybe 140 pounds soaking wet, was making Tommy look like he'd never thrown a punch in his life. And they were only 90 seconds in a round one. Tommy reset his feet, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, trying to time his opponent's movement. The small man, Bruce something, Eddie had said his name was, stood in a strange stance, too upright for boxing, weight distributed evenly instead of coiled on the back foot. His hands were low, open, relaxed. Everything about his posture screamed amateur to Tommy's trained eye. Except for the results. Tommy snapped out a sixth jab, this one with more commitment, more speed. He saw it coming off his shoulder clean, traveling straight down the pipe toward Bruce's face. Bruce's head moved. Not a slip. Boxers slip punches with their whole upper body, a practiced roll of the shoulders and spine. This was different. Bruce's head shifted maybe 3 inches to the left, and Tommy's glove passed through empty space where his nose had been a fraction of a second earlier. Minimal movement. Maximum efficiency. The miss threw Tommy slightly off balance. He'd expected contact, expected the satisfying thud of leather on flesh. Instead, there was nothing, and his momentum carried him forward a half step too far. Bruce didn't counter, didn't throw anything back. Just reset, hands still low, watching. Tommy could hear his own breathing, louder than it should be 90 seconds into a light sparring session. Could hear the faint whir of Eddie's 8mm camera in the corner, capturing this. Could hear the chain of the heavy bag in the far corner of Main Street boxing gym swaying slightly from where some other fighter had been working it hours ago. What he couldn't hear was Bruce breathing at all. "Come on," Bruce said quietly. Not taunting, almost encouraging. "Try again." Tommy's jaw tightened. He threw a combination this time, jab, jab, right cross. The 1-2-3 that had put away 17 professional opponents, that had broken jaws and ended fights in the middle rounds when the other guy was tired and his guard started dropping. First jab, missed by inches, Bruce's head moving again with that minimal shift. Second jab, missed by less, but still missed, Bruce now moving his feet in a tiny shuffle that took his centerline offline. Right cross. Tommy committed fully to this one, throwing his weight behind it, his right hand launching from his hip with bad intentions. Bruce wasn't there. He'd moved. Tommy couldn't even see exactly how, and the right cross sailed past his shoulder. Tommy's upper body was extended, overcommit, and for a brief moment his chin was up and his hands were low, and he was completely, utterly vulnerable. Bruce still didn't throw anything. Just stepped back, creating distance again, resetting. Tommy straightened up, frustration building hot in his chest. "Stand still," he muttered, not really meaning Bruce to hear it. "Why?" Bruce asked, and there was something in his tone, not mockery, but genuine curiosity. "In a real fight, would your opponent stand still?" Tommy didn't answer. He circled left, trying to cut off the ring, trying to use his size and his understanding of angles to trap this guy in a corner where he couldn't slip and slide and make Tommy look like a chump. Bruce circled with him, maintaining distance, and Tommy realized with a cold shock that Bruce was controlling the geography of the ring. Not Tommy, Bruce. Even though Tommy was the boxer, even though this was Tommy's gym, Bruce was dictating where they moved and how fast and what distance they maintained. 2 minutes into round one. Tommy threw a jab to draw a reaction, then immediately followed with a left hook, a feint and rip combination his trainer Eddie had drilled into him for years. It worked against everyone. The jab made opponents think about protecting their face, and the hook came in from the side while they were focused on the center. Bruce's right hand came up in a strange, scooping motion that deflected the jab. His left hand simultaneously checked Tommy's hook before it could get started, palm meeting Tommy's glove and redirecting it downward. Both of Tommy's punches neutralized. At the same time, Tommy had never seen anyone do that in a boxing ring. "What the hell kind of defense is that?" Tommy said, backing off, resetting. "Wing Chun," Bruce said simply. "Different system. This is boxing," Tommy said, irritation clear in his voice now. "We're boxing." "You're boxing," Bruce corrected gently. "I'm fighting." Tommy's hands dropped slightly, confusion mixing with his frustration. "What's the difference?" Bruce smiled. not condescending, but like a teacher who'd just gotten the question he'd been waiting for. Get 2 more rounds. You'll understand. The bell rang. Eddie's phone alarm, set for 3-minute intervals, and Tommy walked to his corner, breathing harder than he wanted to admit. Eddie was there with water, and the 8mm camera was still running on its tripod, the lens pointed at the ring. "Eddie," Tommy said, low enough that Bruce wouldn't hear across the ring. "What the fuck?" Eddie Malone, 55 years old, former light heavyweight contender whose career had been ended by a detached retina in 1952, squeezed water into Tommy's mouth and said nothing for a moment. Just looked at Tommy with an expression Tommy couldn't quite read. "You starting to see it?" Eddie finally asked. "See what? That I can't hit a guy who weighs 140 pounds? Yeah, Eddie, I'm seeing that real clear. You're seeing that there's something outside boxing," Eddie said quietly. "Something you don't understand yet." Tommy looked across the ring. Bruce was standing in his corner. He didn't have a corner man, didn't need one apparently, doing some kind of stretching routine that looked more like Tai Chi than anything Tommy had seen in a boxing gym. He looked completely relaxed. Looked like he could do this all night. Tommy looked down at his own hands, wrapped in 16-ounce Everlast sparring gloves. Hands that had won 35 professional fights. Hands that had knocked out 28 men. Hands that hadn't touched Bruce Lee once in 3 minutes. "I need to figure him out," Tommy muttered. "You do," Eddie agreed. "And you will. But first you need to accept that what you know, all that boxing, all that technique, might not be enough." Tommy looked up sharply. "You saying I'm not good enough?" "I'm saying you're incomplete," Eddie said. "And that little man over there is about to show you exactly how incomplete you are." The phone alarm rang again. Round 2. Tommy stood up, rolling his shoulders, trying to shake off the frustration. He was Tommy, the Hammer, Morrison. He was 35-0. He was ranked 8th in the heavyweight division and scheduled to fight brutal Bob Henderson in 6 weeks for a title eliminator. He was not going to be embarrassed by a 140-pound martial arts instructor. He stepped back to the center of the ring. Bruce met him there. They touched gloves, a respectful tap, tradition even in sparring. "Ready?" Bruce asked. Tommy nodded. What happened next would change everything Tommy thought he knew about fighting. But first, he had to learn a lesson he didn't even know he needed. Eddie Malone had been in boxing for 41 years. He'd started as a corner boy in 1925, when he was 9 years old, working fights at the Olympic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles for 50 cents a night. By 16, he was fighting professionally himself. Scrappy Irish kid from Boyle Heights with fast hands and a granite chin. He'd gone December 3rd, 47 as a light heavyweight, good enough to get ranked, never quite good enough to get a title shot. The detached retina in 1952 had ended that dream, but Eddie had stayed in the game. Trainer now. Good one, too. He'd cornered 3 world champions and developed a reputation for taking raw talent and turning it into something refined. Tommy Morrison was his latest project and potentially his best. The kid, Eddie still thought of him as a kid, even though Tommy was 28, had everything. Size, speed, power, ring IQ. More importantly, he had discipline. Showed up on time, did the road work, listened to instruction. In an era when half the heavyweights Eddie met were either drunks or head cases, Tommy was a professional's professional, which made what was happening in the ring right now so goddamn fascinating. Eddie had met Bruce Lee 6 weeks ago through a mutual acquaintance, a stuntman named Bob Wall who worked in Hollywood and trained at Eddie's gym twice a week. Bob had mentioned this martial arts instructor who was making waves, doing private lessons with actors and athletes, teaching something called Jeet Kune Do that was supposed to be different from traditional kung fu. Eddie had been skeptical. He'd seen plenty of martial artists over the years, karate guys, judo guys, kung fu guys, and while they were impressive in their own context, none of them could really fight by boxing standards. Too many forms, too many rigid techniques, not enough practical application against someone who actually knew how to throw hands. But Bob had insisted, and Eddie respected Bob's judgment, so when Bob offered to introduce them, Eddie had agreed. The meeting had been brief. Bruce had come to Main Street Boxing Gym on a Tuesday afternoon, watched Tommy hit the heavy bag for 15 minutes, then asked if he could make a suggestion about Tommy's footwork. Eddie had almost laughed. This 140-pound Chinese guy wanted to teach a ranked heavyweight about footwork, but he'd said yes, mostly out of curiosity. Bruce had spent 10 minutes showing Tommy a different way to pivot off the jab, a small adjustment in hip rotation that changed the angle of the follow-up cross. It was subtle. Eddie had barely noticed the difference visually, but when Tommy tried on the bag, the cross landed with noticeably more authority. The bag swung differently. Tommy had felt it immediately. Eddie could see it in his face, that flicker of recognition when a fighter discovers something new that actually works. "Where'd you learn that?" Tommy had asked. "Western boxing," Bruce had said simply. "I studied Jack Dempsey's footage." He understood body mechanics better than most people realize. That had surprised Eddie. This wasn't some kung fu mystic spouting philosophy about chi and energy. This was someone who'd done his homework, who understood the practical application of technique. They talked for another hour. Bruce had asked intelligent questions about Tommy's training regimen, his fight preparation, his mental approach, and he'd offered observations that were uncomfortably accurate. He'd pointed out that Tommy's jab was telegraphed by a slight drop of his right hand, that his left hook came from too far outside and gave opponents an extra tenth of a second to react, that his footwork was excellent for boxing rules, but vulnerable to kicks. "Kicks," Tommy had said. "I'm a boxer. Nobody's kicking me." In the ring, no, Bruce had agreed. But in a real fight, the rules change. You should know what exists outside your system. That had led to a longer conversation about the difference between sport fighting and actual combat, about how boxing's rules. No kicks, no elbows, no takedowns, no strikes below the belt. Created both strengths and blind spots. Bruce hadn't been disrespectful about it. Hadn't said boxing was inferior. He just pointed out that it was optimized for a specific context, and outside that context, things changed. Eddie had found himself nodding along. He'd been in real fights, bar brawls, street altercations back in his youth, and he knew Bruce was right. Boxing was supreme within its domain, but that domain had boundaries. Before Bruce left that day, Tommy had asked, "You think you could beat me? In a real fight, no rules." Bruce had paused, considering the question seriously. "I don't know," he'd said finally. "You're much bigger, much stronger, and you're a professional fighter. Those are significant advantages. But I think I could make it very difficult for you, because I'd be fighting a different fight than you're trained for." "Prove it," Tommy had said, grinning. Not hostile, curious. And Bruce had smiled back. "Okay, but not a real fight. Sparring. Light contact. I'll show you what I mean about different systems." They'd set it up for today, December 3rd, 1966. Saturday afternoon, gym mostly empty except for Eddie and one other trainer, Ray Chun, who was in the office doing paperwork. Eddie had brought his 8mm camera because he had a feeling this might be worth documenting. He'd been right. Now, watching round 2 begin, Eddie leaned against the ring post and studied Bruce's movement with the analytical eye of someone who'd seen 10,000 rounds of boxing. The first thing he noticed was the stance. Bruce stood with his feet roughly shoulder-width apart, weight distributed more evenly than a boxer would. His right foot was forward, southpaw stance, which made sense since Bruce had mentioned being right-handed in a previous conversation. But unlike a southpaw boxer, Bruce's rear foot wasn't angled out for power generation. It was pointed more forward, aligned with his hips. Mobility stance, Eddie realized. Optimized for movement in multiple directions, not just forward and back. Bruce's hands were low, hovering around chest height, rather than up by his face like a boxer's guard. His fingers were loose, open, not curled into tight fists. That should have been a massive opening. Any boxer would tell you to keep your hands up to protect your face, but somehow it wasn't. Bruce's head movement compensated for the low guard, and his hands were positioned to intercept incoming punches before they fully extended. It was unorthodox as hell, but it was working. Tommy came forward, trying to establish his jab. He threw it 3 times in quick succession. Pop, pop, pop. Working behind it like he'd been taught, using it to measure distance and set up his power shots. Bruce made them all miss, But what fascinated Eddie was how he wasn't slipping the boxing sense, wasn't using the classical shoulder roll defense Eddie had taught Tommy. Instead, Bruce was making tiny, precise adjustments, a slight turn of the head, a small shift of weight, a minute pivot that took his center line offline by just enough. Economy of motion, Eddie thought. Nothing wasted. Tommy threw a right cross, committing his weight behind it. Bruce's lead hand came up in that strange, scooping motion Eddie had seen in round one. Pac saw, Bruce had called it later, a wing chun technique, and redirected the cross harmlessly to the side. Then Bruce's rear hand snapped out, so fast Eddie almost missed it, stopping about 2 inches from Tommy's face. A stop hit. Bruce had explained the concept earlier. Instead of blocking and then countering, the standard boxing rhythm of defense, then offense, Bruce was intercepting the attack and counterattacking simultaneously. One motion instead of two. Tommy blinked, clearly startled by how close that hand had come to his face, and backed off. "You see it?" Bruce asked quietly. "See what?" Tommy's breathing was elevated now, frustration clear in his voice. "Your cross is telegraphed. Your shoulder drops slightly before you throw it. Gives me time to read it." Tommy's jaw tightened. Eddie could see the competitiveness flaring. Tommy didn't like being told his technique had flaws, especially by someone he'd expected to dominate easily. Tommy threw a jab-jab left-hook combination, one of his best sequences. The hooks came in from outside, looping around Bruce's guard, and it was fast, probably the fastest combination Tommy had thrown so far. Bruce dealt with it the same way he'd dealt with everything else. The jabs were parried with those wing chun, scooping motions, and when the hook came, Bruce didn't try to block it. He stepped inside, closing the distance so dramatically that the hook passed behind his head. Suddenly Bruce was in the pocket, chest to chest with Tommy, hands pressed against Tommy's elbows in what Eddie recognized as a trapping position. Tommy tried to throw an uppercut, the natural response when someone's that close, but his arms were controlled. Bruce's hands were glued to his elbows, and Tommy couldn't generate the leverage he needed. For maybe 2 seconds, they stayed like that, frozen in this strange clinch that wasn't quite a clinch. Then Bruce disengaged, flowing backward like water, and reset at his preferred distance. Tommy stood there, breathing hard, hands down by his sides. "What the hell was that?" he said. "Trapping range," Bruce said. "The distance between punching and wrestling. Most boxers don't train for it because it doesn't exist in your sport. The referee breaks you up before you can stay there. But in a real fight, it's where a lot of combat happens." Tommy looked over at Eddie, and Eddie saw something in his fighter's eyes he rarely saw: doubt. Not doubt in his own ability, exactly, but doubt in the completeness of his knowledge. "Eddie," Tommy called. "You seeing this?" Eddie nodded slowly. "I'm seeing it. Am I doing something wrong?" "No," Eddie said honestly. "You're doing everything right. For boxing." But he's not boxing. Tommy turned back to Bruce. "So what are you doing?" "I'm showing you the gaps," Bruce said. "Every system has them. Boxing's gap is that it's optimized for a very specific context. Two people, roughly the same weight, agreed upon rules, a referee to enforce those rules, a confined space, a limited time period. Inside that context, boxing is incredibly effective. But outside that context, he gestured at the space between them. Things change. So you're saying boxing doesn't work in a real fight?" "I'm saying boxing by itself is incomplete," Bruce corrected. "Just like Kung Fu by itself is incomplete. Just like Judo by itself is incomplete. Every system has strengths and weaknesses. The question is, are you willing to learn from other systems to cover your weaknesses?" Tommy was silent for a moment, processing that. The phone alarm went off again. End of round 2. Tommy walked back to his corner, and Eddie could see the wheels turning in his fighter's head. This was the dangerous moment, Eddie knew. The moment when ego and curiosity went to war. Some fighters doubled down on what they knew, refusing to admit there might be something beyond their expertise. Others opened themselves up to learning, even if it meant acknowledging limitations. Eddie hoped Tommy was the second type. "How you feeling?" Eddie asked, squeezing water into Tommy's mouth. "Like I'm fighting a ghost," Tommy muttered. "I can't touch him, Eddie. I can't fucking touch him." "You're not supposed to touch him yet," Eddie said. "He's teaching you something." You paying attention? Tommy looked up, water dripping down his chin. You want me to lose? I want you to learn, Eddie said quietly. There's a difference. You're going to fight brutal Bob Henderson in 6 weeks. Bob's going to come at you like a freight train, same way he always does. You're going to beat him because you're faster and smarter and better conditioned. But after you beat Bob, there's going to be someone else. And after them, someone else. And eventually, you're going to run into someone who has something you've never seen before. Something you don't know how to deal with. Eddie leaned in closer, voice low. That little man over there, he's giving you a gift. He's showing you what's outside your knowledge base. He's showing you the holes in your game. You can get pissed about it, or you can learn from it. Your choice. Tommy's jaw worked, pride and pragmatism battling behind his eyes. What do I do? He asked finally. Stop trying to win, Eddie said. Start trying to understand. Watch what he does. Figure out how he does it. Ask questions. And then, and this is the hard part, admit that maybe there's something valuable in a system you don't understand yet. The phone alarm rang. Round 3. Tommy stood up, and Eddie saw something different in his posture. Less tension, more openness. Tommy walked to center ring, and Bruce met him there. They touched gloves again. Can I ask you something? Tommy said, Of course. Why doesn't anybody know about this? If what you're doing works so well, why isn't every fighter learning it? Bruce smiled slightly. Because most fighters are like you were 2 rounds ago. They're so invested in their system, so sure that what they know is complete that they can't see beyond it. They mistake style for substance. They think, I'm a boxer or I'm a kung fu guy is an identity, not just a description of training. An identity is hard to change. But you changed, Tommy said. You learned boxing. You learned other stuff. I learned to see, Bruce corrected. There's a difference between learning techniques and learning principles. Techniques are specific. Principles are universal. I don't care if a technique comes from boxing or kung fu or wrestling or judo. I care if it works, if it's efficient, if it's real. Tommy nodded slowly, absorbing that. Show me again, he said. That trapping thing. Show me how you control my arms. Bruce's smile widened slightly, genuine warmth in his eyes. Okay, but I'm going to do it slow this time. So you can see, for the next 3 minutes, the nature of what was happening in the ring changed fundamentally. It wasn't sparring anymore. It was education. And Eddie Malone, watching from the corner with his 8mm camera whirring quietly, knew he was documenting something rare. The moment a fighter's mind opened to possibility. The moment stubbornness became curiosity. The moment a student was born. Understood. Underscore. Bruce Lee had first walked into a boxing gym in Seattle, Washington, in the spring of 1959. He'd been 18 years old, fresh off the boat from Hong Kong, carrying a suitcase with 3 changes of clothes and a head full of Wing Chun techniques his Sifu, Yip Man, had drilled into him for 5 years. He thought he knew how to fight. He'd won street fights in Hong Kong, had a reputation in the Kowloon rooftop boxing circles as someone quick and dangerous despite his size. Then he'd met a Golden Gloves boxer named Frank Torres at Edison Technical School, and Frank had offered to spar. Bruce had agreed, confident. The sparring session had lasted maybe 90 seconds before Bruce realized he was in serious trouble. Frank wasn't faster than him. Bruce was probably faster in pure hand speed terms. Frank wasn't more skilled in the traditional martial arts sense. Bruce's Wing Chun was technically sophisticated in ways Frank's boxing wasn't. But Frank could hit him, repeatedly, and Bruce couldn't hit Frank back. The problem was distance management. Frank understood range in a way Bruce didn't yet. Understood how to control space, how to cut off angles, how to make Bruce move where Frank wanted him to move. Every time Bruce tried to close into trapping range, the close quarter space where Wing Chun's hand techniques were most effective, Frank's jab snapped out and stopped him cold. And when Bruce tried to stay outside and work at longer range, Frank's footwork was so efficient that Bruce couldn't maintain the distance he wanted. Bruce had left that sparring session with a bloody nose, a bruised ego, and a crucial realization. Wing Chun as he learned it, was incomplete. Not wrong, not useless, but incomplete. The techniques worked, Bruce knew they worked, had used them effectively in Hong Kong. But they were optimized for a specific kind of fight. Close range, usually against opponents who didn't have sophisticated footwork or distance management. Against someone who actually understood how to control space, someone like Frank, the gaps in Wing Chun became obvious. That realization had been painful. Bruce had spent 5 years studying Wing Chun, had invested enormous time and energy into mastering the system. Admitting its limitations felt like admitting his own inadequacy. But Bruce had something many martial artists lacked: intellectual honesty. The ability to look at evidence and adjust his beliefs accordingly, even when it hurt. So instead of doubling down on Wing Chun and insisting the system was perfect, Bruce had done something radical. He'd started studying boxing. He'd bought books: Jack Dempsey's Championship Fighting, Edwin Hazlitt's On Boxing, anything he could find about Western boxing technique. He'd watched fights on television, studying footwork and head movement frame by frame when possible. He'd asked Frank to teach him, and Frank had been generous with his knowledge. Over the next year, Bruce had integrated boxing's footwork into his martial arts. The efficiency of the boxer's stance, weight on the back foot, ready to explode forward. The jab as a rangefinder and control mechanism. The understanding that fighting was as much about geometry and distance as it was about technique. But Bruce hadn't stopped there. He'd also studied fencing, fascinated by the way fencers understood timing and distance. He'd watched wrestlers, intrigued by their understanding of leverage and body mechanics. He'd read books on biomechanics and physics, trying to understand the principles underlying effective technique. By 1961, when he'd opened his first school in Seattle, Bruce was teaching something that looked like Wing Chun on the surface, but was fundamentally different underneath. He'd kept some Wing Chun techniques, the ones that were efficient and practical, and discarded others. He'd added boxing footwork, fencing concepts of distance and timing, wrestling principles of off-balancing. His traditional Wing Chun brothers had been scandalized. Some had called him a traitor to the system. Others had said he was diluting the purity of Chinese martial arts by mixing in Western techniques. Bruce hadn't cared. He'd been searching for something deeper than style loyalty. He'd been searching for truth. What worked? What was real? What could you actually use against a resisting opponent who was trying to hurt you? Those were the only questions that mattered to Bruce. By 1964, when he'd moved to Oakland and opened another school, Bruce had essentially created a new system. He was calling it Jun Fan Gung Fu, after his Chinese name, Jun Fan, but it was already evolving beyond Wing Chun's framework. He was testing everything, discarding what didn't work, keeping what did, constantly refining and improving. And then, in early 1966, he'd had another revelation. Even his modified, integrated approach was still a system, still a collection of techniques organized around certain principles. And systems, by their nature, created rigidity. Students would learn the techniques, practice them, and eventually start to think the techniques themselves were the point. They weren't. The point was adaptability. The point was being able to respond to whatever was in front of you, using whatever worked in that specific moment against that specific opponent. Not because the technique was part of your system, but because it was the most efficient solution to the problem at hand. Bruce had started calling this new approach Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But even that name was temporary, a placeholder. What Bruce was really teaching wasn't style at all. It was a philosophy. Take what works, discard what doesn't. Add what is uniquely your own. Be like water, which brought him to today, December 3rd, 1966, standing in a boxing ring in Eddie Malone's gym, teaching a professional heavyweight boxer named Tommy Morrison about the gaps in his knowledge. Bruce had known, the moment Eddie had introduced them 6 weeks ago, that Tommy was the real deal. You couldn't fake that kind of movement, that kind of power generation. Tommy had probably 15 years of serious training, thousands of rounds of sparring, actual professional fights against other trained killers. He was legitimate, but he was also limited. Not by his ability. Tommy's boxing was excellent, but by his framework, by the boundaries of his system. Tommy thought like a boxer because he was a boxer. He understood fighting through the lens of boxing's rules and conventions. And that was both his strength and his weakness. Bruce's goal today wasn't to beat Tommy, wasn't to embarrass him or prove boxing was inferior. Bruce respected boxing deeply, had learned enormous amounts from it, incorporated its best elements into his own approach. No, Bruce's goal was to expand Tommy's framework, to show him what existed beyond the boundaries he'd been trained within, to crack open the shell of certainty just enough that curiosity could get in. And based on what had just happened in round 2, it was working. Now, in round 3, Tommy was asking questions instead of trying to win. That was progress. That was the first step toward real learning. "Show me again," Tommy had said. "That trapping thing. Show me how you control my arms." Bruce nodded and moved closer into the range where Tommy's punches would normally be most dangerous. "Throw a jab at me," Bruce said. "Half speed. I want you to feel what I'm doing." Tommy hesitated for a moment, then threw a jab, controlled, about 50% power. Bruce's lead hand came up in the Pak-Som motion, the slapping parry that redirected Tommy's jab to the outside. But instead of stopping there, Bruce's hand stayed in contact with Tommy's arm, maintaining connection. Simultaneously, Bruce's rear hand came up and controlled Tommy's other arm at the elbow. Both of Tommy's arms were now momentarily trapped, Bruce's hands pressing against them, controlling their position in space. "Feel that?" Bruce asked. Tommy nodded. Bruce could feel the tension in Tommy's arms, the instinct to pull away, to regain control. "In boxing, this would never happen," Bruce said. "The referee would break us up. But in a real fight, this range exists. And if I can control your arms for even 1 second, I can hit you and you can't hit me back. Watch." Bruce released Tommy's right arm, but kept control of his left. Then, with his now free right hand, Bruce mimed a straight punch to Tommy's face, stopping the fist an inch from Tommy's nose. "See? Your right arm is too far outside to protect you. Your left is controlled. You're defenseless." Bruce released Tommy and stepped back. Tommy stood there, processing, his hands unconsciously moving through the motion, trying to understand the mechanics of what had just happened. "How do I defend against that?" Tommy asked. "Several ways," Bruce said. "First option, don't let me get that close. Use your footwork to maintain distance. Your jab to keep me outside. I tried that in round 1. Didn't work. Because you were jabbing to hit me," Bruce said, "not to control distance. There's a difference. A jab can be a weapon, trying to land and do damage. Or it can be a barrier, trying to control space and prevent me from entering. You were doing the first. You need to do the second." Tommy nodded slowly. "What's the other option?" "Second option. If I do get a trapping range, don't try to pull away. That's your instinct, but it doesn't work. I'm already controlling your arms. Pulling just gives me more leverage. Instead, you need to disrupt my base. Ow! Stomp on my foot. Knee to my thigh. Headbutt. Change levels and shoot for a takedown if you know wrestling. The point is, if you can't win a hand fight, change the fight. Attack something else." Bruce demonstrated, moving through the sequence slowly. Tommy watched intently, and Bruce could see the wheels turning. This was new information outside Tommy's existing framework, and Tommy was struggling to integrate it. Good. Struggle meant growth. "Third option," Bruce continued, "is to learn trapping yourself. So when I try to control your arms, you can counter-trap me. It becomes a chess match at close range. But that takes time to develop. Takes sensitivity training, cheese saw, sticky hands drills. You have to learn to feel what your opponent is doing through contact, not just see it. Like wrestling," Tommy said. Bruce smiled. "Exactly like wrestling. Wrestlers understand this instinctively. They're always in contact with their opponent, always feeling for leverage and position. Trapping is the same concept, just applied to the hands and arms instead of the whole body." Tommy was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. Then he said something that surprised Bruce. "I feel stupid." Bruce tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I've been training my whole life. Since I was 12 years old. 16 years. And I didn't know any of this stuff. Didn't even know it existed. How did I miss it?" "You didn't miss it," Bruce said gently. "It wasn't part of your training. Boxing doesn't teach trapping because boxing's rules don't allow prolonged clinching. So there's no reason for boxers to develop those skills. You're not stupid. You're specialized. What's the difference? Specialization means you're very, very good at one thing. Stupid means you refuse to learn. You're not refusing. You're here, asking questions, trying to understand. That's the opposite of stupid. Tommy seemed to relax slightly at that. The defensiveness that had been in his posture earlier, the ego protection, was fading. He was becoming genuinely curious instead of threatened. Can I try something? Tommy asked. Of course. I want to try to get to that trapping range. Intentionally. See if I can do what you do. Bruce nodded. This was exactly what he'd been hoping for. The moment when Tommy stopped seeing this as a competition and started seeing it as research. Go ahead, Bruce said. Try to close distance and trap my arms. Tommy came forward, more thoughtfully this time. Less concerned with hitting Bruce and more concerned with understanding the geometry of the space between them. He threw a jab, but it was different from before. Not fully committed, more of a rangefinder, trying to draw a reaction from Bruce that Tommy could then capitalize on. Smart, Bruce thought. He's adapting. Bruce parried the jab, and Tommy immediately tried to step in, reaching for Bruce's arms to trap them the way Bruce had trapped Tommy's. But Tommy's timing was off. He was thinking about trapping, which meant he was a fraction of a second slow. Bruce's rear hand came up and checked Tommy's attempt, then flowed into a light tap against Tommy's shoulder, a touch to indicate where a real strike would have landed. Tommy backed off, frustrated again, but in a different way. Not angry, more like a student struggling with a math problem. I'm too slow, Tommy said. You're thinking too much, Bruce corrected. Right now, you're trying to remember the steps. First this, then that. But trapping doesn't work like that. It's responsive, not planned. You feel what I'm giving you, and you react. You can't think your way through it. You have to develop the sensitivity so your body knows what to do automatically. How long does that take? Bruce considered. With regular practice? 6 months to a year before you're functional at it. 2 to 3 years before you're good. 5 years before it's internalized. Tommy let out a breath. I don't have that kind of time. I'm fighting Bob Henderson in 6 weeks. I know. And you don't need trapping to beat Bob Henderson. You're already better than him. But after Bob, there's going to be someone else. And after them, someone else. If you want to be complete, if you want to have answers for everything, you need to start learning this stuff now. Not because you need it immediately, but because eventually you will. Eddie's phone alarm went off. End of round 3. They've been working for 9 minutes now, and Bruce could see the fatigue starting to show in Tommy's face. Not physical fatigue. Tommy was in excellent shape. But mental fatigue. The exhaustion that comes from having your worldview challenged, from being forced to integrate new information that doesn't fit your existing framework. Bruce walked to the corner where he'd left his water bottle. Tommy went to his corner where Eddie waited. Bruce took a long drink, letting the cool water settle him. His own breathing was elevated. Not much, but noticeably. Tommy was good. If this had been a real fight, if Tommy had been allowed to use his size and strength advantage fully, the outcome might have been very different. Bruce was under no illusions about that. But that wasn't the point of today. Bruce looked over at Tommy's corner. Eddie was talking to Tommy, too quietly for Bruce to hear, but the body language was clear. Eddie was encouraging, supportive. Good. Tommy needed that right now. Needed someone who believed in his ability to grow. Bruce thought about his own teachers. Yip Man, who'd given him the foundation of Wing Chun. James Yim Lee, who'd become a brother and partner in Oakland. Ed Parker, who'd shown him the karate perspective. All the boxers and wrestlers and fencers he'd studied and learned from. None of them had taught him Jeet Kune Do. That had come from Bruce himself, from his willingness to look beyond any single system and ask the deeper questions. But they'd all contributed. They'd all been pieces of the puzzle. And now, maybe Bruce could be that for Tommy. Not a replacement for Eddie's excellent boxing coaching, but a supplement, an expansion, a way of seeing beyond the ring ropes. The phone alarm rang again. Round 4. Bruce walked back to center ring. Tommy met him there, and Bruce could see something different in Tommy's eyes now. Less ego, more openness. Thank you, Tommy said quietly. Bruce was surprised. For what? For not making me feel like an idiot. You could have. You could have embarrassed me, made me look stupid. You didn't. Because you're not stupid, Bruce said simply. You're a dedicated martial artist who's been training in one system very seriously. There's honor in that. I'm just showing you what else is possible. Tommy nodded. Then he asked, "One more round." "One more round," Bruce agreed. They touched gloves. And for the next 3 minutes, something remarkable happened. Tommy stopped trying to win, stopped trying to prove anything, stopped trying to defend his ego. He started playing, experimenting, trying different approaches, asking questions with his body instead of his words, testing distances, trying to feel the ranges Bruce had been describing. Bruce met him there, responding with the same energy, not dominating but guiding. When Tommy tried something that had potential, Bruce let it work, let Tommy succeed enough to feel the principle. When Tommy's technique was sloppy, Bruce showed him why it didn't work, but gently, educationally. At one point, Tommy managed to slip one of Bruce's straight leads, a genuine, clean slip using head movement instead of backing away. Bruce smiled and nodded. Good. That's good. You're adapting. Tommy threw a jab, and this time when Bruce parried it, Tommy didn't try to force his way in a trapping range. Instead, he pivoted laterally, circling to Bruce's outside, using angles the way Bruce had been using them. Better, Bruce said. You're thinking three-dimensionally now, not just forward and back. Near the end of the round, Tommy tried something ambitious. He feinted a jab to draw Bruce's parry, then pulled the jab back and threw a right cross to the body, changing levels, attacking a different target than Bruce was expecting. The cross landed. Light contact, just a touch really, but it landed. Both of them stopped. Tommy's eyes went wide. I hit you. Bruce laughed. Genuine, delighted laughter. You did. You see? You're already learning. That feint and level change, that's excellent boxing. And it worked because you stopped trying to do what you thought you should do and started responding to what was actually happening. Tommy was grinning now, the frustration from earlier rounds completely gone. Can we go again? I want to see if I can do that again. You will, Bruce said, but probably not today. You're tired. Your technique is starting to break down. I can see in your footwork. Better to end on a success than push until you're sloppy. The phone alarm rang. End of round 4. They touched gloves one final time and climbed out of the ring. Eddie was already there with towels and water. Hell of a session, Eddie said, handing Tommy a towel. You okay? I'm great, Tommy said, and he meant it. The frustration was gone, replaced by something else. Excitement. The thrill of discovery. Eddie, did you see? I figured out how to. I saw, Eddie said, smiling. You're learning. That's what matters. Bruce was unlacing his gloves when Ray Chun emerged from the office in the back. Ray was Eddie's business partner, a former bantamweight who'd fought in the 30s and now handled the administrative side of the gym. He'd been doing paperwork during the sparring session, hadn't watched any of it. How'd it go? Ray asked Eddie. See for yourself, Eddie said, gesturing to the 8mm camera still running on its tripod. Got the whole thing on film. Ray looked at the camera, then at Bruce, then at Tommy. That good, huh? That educational, Eddie corrected. Bruce finished removing his gloves and reached for his street clothes, black cotton pants and a simple white t-shirt. As he dressed, he said to Tommy, you have real talent, not just as a boxer, as a martial artist. You're coachable. You can let go of ego long enough to learn. That's rare. You think I could learn what you do? Tommy asked. The Jeet Kune Do thing. Bruce considered that. Yes, but it would take time, and it might make your boxing worse before it makes you better. Tommy frowned. What do you mean? Right now, your boxing is clean. Practiced. Automatic. If you start learning trapping and kicks in different ranges, your brain has to process new information. For a while, you'll be thinking instead of reacting. You'll be slower, more hesitant. Eventually, after enough practice, the new stuff becomes automatic too, and you're better than before. But there's a valley you have to cross first, a period where you're worse than you were. How long does that valley last? Depends on the person. 3 months, maybe 6. And in your case, with a fight coming up in 6 weeks, I'd say it's a bad idea to change anything fundamental right now. Beat Bob Henderson first. Then, if you're interested, we can talk about longer-term training. Tommy nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in that. If I could come back, After the Henderson fight? Learn more. Anytime, Bruce said. I'd be happy to work with you. Eddie spoke up. What's your rate? For private training like this? Bruce waved him off. Today was free. I enjoyed it. Tommy's a good student, and I learned things too. What did you learn? Tommy asked, surprised. You dominated me. I learned how good boxers manage distance, Bruce said honestly. I've studied it on film, practiced against heavy bags, sparred with a few boxers before. But your professional level, your footwork is so clean, so efficient. I was watching how you cut angles, even when you were frustrated, how you controlled the center of the ring. That's valuable information for me. Helps me understand what I'd face against an elite boxer in a real situation. Tommy seemed taken aback by that, by the idea that Bruce, who just spent 4 rounds making Tommy miss, had also been learning. Also, Bruce added, working with you helped me refine my teaching approach. I'm opening a school in Los Angeles soon. Going to have more students. Need to get better at explaining concepts clearly. You asked good questions today. Made me think about how to articulate things I usually just do intuitively. Eddie smiled. So everybody wins. That's the point, Bruce said. Martial arts shouldn't be about one person beating another person. It should be about both people getting better, testing each other, challenging each other, growing together. He finished dressing and picked up his small gym bag. Tommy, good luck with the Henderson fight. I'll try to come watch if I'm in town. You really think I'll beat him? Tommy asked. Yes, Bruce said simply. You're faster, smarter, and you have better conditioning. He's strong and aggressive, but he's predictable. You'll figure him out by the 3rd round and take over from there. Tommy grinned. You sound pretty sure. I'm good at reading fighters, Bruce said. It's part of what I do. They shook hands, Tommy's hand completely engulfing Bruce's, and Bruce headed for the gym's exit. But before he reached the door, Tommy called out, Hey, Bruce. Bruce turned. What you said about systems being incomplete, about every style having gaps. Does that apply to what you do too? To Jeet Kune Do. Bruce smiled, appreciating the question. Especially to Jeet Kune Do. That's the whole point. The moment I think I've figured it all out, the moment I stop looking for gaps and weaknesses in my own approach, that's the moment I stop growing. Jeet Kune Do isn't a destination. It's a process. There is no finish line. Tommy nodded, absorbing that. See you around, Bruce said, and walked out into the December afternoon. Behind him, in the gym, Eddie Malone was already rewinding the 8mm film, eager to study what the camera had captured. Raychon was asking Tommy questions about the sparring session, trying to understand what had happened. And Tommy Morrison was standing in the center of the boxing ring, hands wrapped, looking at the space where Bruce had been standing moments ago, replaying the last 4 rounds in his mind. Something had shifted in Tommy today. Something fundamental. He'd walked into this session thinking he knew what fighting was. Thinking boxing was the answer, the pinnacle, the ultimate expression of combat sports. He walked out of it understanding that boxing was one answer. A very good answer, highly refined and effective within its context. But not the only answer. There were other questions he hadn't even known to ask yet. Other dimensions of combat he hadn't explored. Other ways of moving, thinking, responding. And for the first time in his professional career, Tommy felt something he hadn't felt in years. The excitement of being a beginner again. Of having new territory to explore. Of not knowing everything. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Eddie came over, camera in hand. You did good today, kid. I couldn't hit him, Eddie. Not once. Until the very end. That's not the point. The point is you open your mind. You stopped defending your ego and started learning. That's harder than winning a fight. Tommy looked at his trainer. You knew, didn't you? You knew what would happen. Eddie smiled slightly. I knew it would be interesting. I didn't know exactly how it would go. But yeah, I had a feeling Bruce would show you something important. That's why I set this up. Thanks, Tommy said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Thank me after you beat Henderson. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Tommy climbed out of the ring and started unwrapping his hands. As he did, he caught his reflection in one of the gym's mirrors. He looked the same as he had 4 hours ago. Same face, same body, same Tommy Morrison. But something inside was different. He'd been shown a door he hadn't known existed. And now that he knew it was there, Now that he'd glimpsed what was on the other side, he couldn't unknow it. Couldn't go back to thinking boxing was everything. The question was, did he have the courage to walk through that door? To spend years learning something new, becoming a beginner again, struggling with techniques and concepts that wouldn't come naturally? Or would he stay in the comfortable mastery of what he already knew? Tommy didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, he had a question worth asking. Underscore. Underscore. 6 weeks later, on the night of January 14th, 1967, Tommy Morrison stepped into the ring at the Olympic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles to face Robert "Brutal" Henderson for the California State Heavyweight Championship. The Olympic was packed. 4,000 people crammed into the Art Deco venue that had hosted boxing since 1925. The crowd was loud, partisan, split roughly evenly between Tommy's supporters and Henderson's. Both fighters were Southern California natives, Tommy from Long Beach, Henderson from Compton, and both had strong local followings. Eddie Malone stood in Tommy's corner, calm and focused despite the noise. Next to him was Ray Chun, handling the water and tools. In the front row, 3 seats from the corner, Bruce Lee sat quietly, watching. Bruce had driven down from Oakland that morning, a 6-hour trip he'd made on a whim. He'd told Linda, his wife of 8 months, that he wanted to see how Tommy did, wanted to see if their sparring session had affected Tommy's performance at all. But the truth was more complicated than that. Bruce had been thinking about Tommy Morrison constantly since their December session. Not because Tommy had been particularly skilled, though he was, but because Tommy had been willing to learn, had been able to set ego aside and admit there were gaps in his knowledge. That quality was rare. Bruce had taught dozens of students over the past 6 years, and most of them had some degree of ego protection. They came to learn martial arts, but they also came with preconceptions about what martial arts should be, about what they were entitled to know, about how quickly they should progress. Tommy had none of that. Tommy had just wanted to understand. And Bruce had found himself hoping, genuinely hoping, that Tommy would win tonight. Not just for Tommy's sake, but for what it might mean for the future. If Tommy beat Henderson and continued his rise through the heavyweight division, and if Tommy remained open to learning Jeet Kune Do concepts, then maybe Bruce would have proof that worked outside the martial arts world. Proof that someone in mainstream combat sports could benefit from his approach. That mattered more than Bruce liked to admit. Because for all his confidence in Jeet Kune Do's effectiveness, he still faced constant skepticism. Traditional martial artists said he was a traitor, diluting ancient wisdom. Western fighters said Kung Fu was useless, all forms and no substance. Nobody took him completely seriously yet. But if a ranked heavyweight boxer started using Jeet Kune Do principles and it improved his performance, that would be evidence. Real, measurable, undeniable evidence. So Bruce sat in the audience, watching carefully as the ring announcer introduced both fighters. Henderson came out first. 6'3", 218 pounds, 27-2 record with 19 knockouts. He had a shaved head, thick neck, heavy shoulders. Looked exactly like his nickname, Brutal. His fighting style matched his appearance. Aggressive, come-forward pressure. Not much subtlety, but tremendous power. He'd knocked out his last 4 opponents, none of them making it past the 6th round. Tommy entered next to California Dreaming, playing over the arena speakers. 6'1", 201 pounds, 35-0 with 28 knockouts. Lean and athletic where Henderson was thick and powerful. Tommy moved with a fluidity that Henderson lacked, bouncing slightly on his toes as he climbed through the ropes. Bruce watched Tommy's eyes during the introductions. Focused, present, no fear, but no arrogance either. Good signs. The referee called both fighters to center ring for final instructions. They touched gloves, a light tap, respectful, and returned to their corners. Eddie said something to Tommy, too quiet for Bruce to hear from the audience. Tommy nodded, took a deep breath, and turned to face Henderson. The bell rang. Henderson came forward immediately, establishing his pressure game from the opening seconds. He threw a jab, stiff, heavy, designed more to push Tommy backward than to score points. Tommy slipped it cleanly, circling to his left, moving around the outside. Good, Bruce thought. Don't let him set his feet. Henderson cut off the angle, hurting Tommy toward the ropes. He threw a jab-right cross combination, both punches with bad intentions behind them. Tommy blocked the jab with his shoulder, slipped across, and fired back a quick three-punch combination, jab-right to the body. The body shot landed clean. Bruce heard the thud, even from his seat 15 rows back. Henderson barely reacted, just kept coming forward, eating the distance between them. For the next 2 minutes, the pattern repeated. Henderson pressing, trying to trap Tommy on the ropes or in corners where his power would be most effective. Tommy moving, circling, using angles to stay out of danger while landing quick combinations whenever Henderson overcommit. It was technical boxing, not exciting for casual fans, but beautiful to anyone who understood the chess match happening. Henderson was bigger and stronger and hit harder, but Tommy was faster and smarter and more efficient with his energy. The question was whether that would be enough. The bell rang, ending round 1. Both fighters returned to their corners. Bruce watched Eddie's face as he gave instructions. Eddie looked satisfied, not worried. Good sign. Round 2 began, and Henderson adjusted his approach slightly. Instead of constant forward pressure, he started feinting more, trying to draw reactions from Tommy that he could counter. It was smarter strategy than Bruce had expected from a fighter with Henderson's reputation. Tommy adjusted too, started using more lateral movement, not just circling, but actually angling off Henderson's attacks in ways that created better counterpunching opportunities. That's new, Bruce thought. Tommy's footwork in December had been good, excellent, even, but this was more sophisticated. This was using angles not just to escape, but to create offense. Midway through round 2, Henderson threw a big right hand that missed. Tommy didn't circle away like he'd been doing. Instead, he stepped inside, closed the distance dramatically, and threw a rapid-fire combination to Henderson's body. 5 punches in maybe 2 seconds, all landing in a tight cluster just below the ribcage. Bruce sat up straighter in his seat. That was trapping range. Not quite the hand-trapping Bruce had shown Tommy, but the same principle, getting so close that the opponent's power punches couldn't generate leverage, working at a distance where quick, short-range strikes were more effective than long, looping punches. Henderson tried to clinch, to tie Tommy up, but Tommy stepped out before Henderson could grab him, returning to boxing range cleanly. The crowd roared. They'd seen something happen, even if most of them couldn't articulate exactly what it was. Bruce knew what it was. Tommy was applying the concepts. Not perfectly, there was still hesitation, still thinking, but he was doing it, using principles from their December session in an actual fight against a dangerous opponent. Rounds 3 and 4 followed a similar pattern. Henderson kept pressing, kept trying to land his big shots. Tommy kept moving, kept using angles, kept working the body whenever he got inside. By the end of round 4, Henderson's breathing was labored. His forward pressure was noticeably slower. The body work was adding up. Bruce glanced at the judges' scorecards, visible on monitors for the audience. All 3 judges had Tommy ahead, probably 3 rounds to 1. Round 5 started, and Henderson came out more aggressive, sensing he was behind on points. He threw a big left hook that Tommy couldn't completely avoid,